Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's event with author Ken Fischer, presented by University of Michigan Press. We'll be watching for audience questions throughout the event. If you're on Zoom, please submit your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom center of the screen. If you're watching on Facebook, please let us know your question in a comment. You can turn captions on or off using the Show Captions button in Zoom at the bottom right side of the screen. And we'll be recording the event this evening and sharing it on our Facebook page later in the week. This evening, it's my great pleasure to introduce Ken Fischer. Ken served as president of the University Musical Society on the campus of the University of Michigan for 30 years. Under Ken's leadership, UMS undertook an ambitious campaign to expand and diversify both its programming and its audiences. In recognition of these efforts, in 2014, UMS was awarded the National Medal of the Arts, which Ken accepted on the organization's behalf from President Barack Obama. And in 2019, Ken was awarded an honorary doctorate of fine arts from the University of Michigan. We're here tonight to discuss Ken's book, Everybody In, Nobody Out, which looks back through his time at UMS. The book is peppered with colorful anecdotes, including backstage looks at the painstaking work that goes into some landmark performances. These included the Vienna Philharmonic's final tour with Leonard Bernstein, appearances by then relatively unknown opera singer Cecilia Bartoli, and a multi-year partnership with the Royal Shakespeare Company. At its heart, though, Everybody In, Nobody Out is more than a history of UMS. It is a reflection on the power of the performing arts to engage and enrich communities, not by handing down cultural enrichment from on high, but by meeting communities where they live and helping them preserve cultural heritage, incubate talent, and find ways to make community voices heard. Ken, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Scott, it's great to be here and to be hosted by the publisher, University of Michigan Press. I was so honored that you as a Michigan guy, I grew up in nearby Plymouth. I had French horn lessons here as a kid. My wife and I went to grad school here, and then to spend the last 30 years and to have the University of Michigan Press be the publisher, I'm really honored. So I'm glad to be your author of the month here. Yeah, it's great. Thanks.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you, Ken. And in the background, the audience should see our slide presentation where there's a photo of the cover of your book. And I think the first question that comes to mind is the title, Everybody In, Nobody Out. What's that mean? Where does that phrase come from? And why did you choose it for the book's title?
Well, first of all, it's not mine. It belongs to Patrick Hayes, my mentor, a wonderful impresario in Washington, D.C., who came down from New York in the late 30s, early 40s to be a manager of the Washington Symphony. But then he became a presenter and started the Patrick Hayes Concert Bureau. And also at that time, he was instrumental in helping to desegregate the lunch counters of Washington. He became a real champion for diversifying and opening up the theaters. And you might remember that in 1939, Marian Anderson was denied the opportunity to perform at Constitution Hall because she was Black. And that so incensed the Roosevelts, Eleanor and the president, Franklin Roosevelt. She resigned from the Daughters of the American Revolution. And the two of them invited her to perform on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in front of 75,000 people on an Easter Sunday. Well, that influenced Patrick Hayes, although he saw that from a distance. But when he came to Washington, he said, we're going to open up the arts and make them for everyone. And so when he became a nonprofit organization, started the Washington Performing Arts Society, now WPA, he said, we're going to make sure that the arts are for everyone, and everybody in, nobody out will be our inclusion policy. And he chose as his first board chair Todd Duncan, the first Porgy and Bess, and a distinguished professor of voice. So I was able, in my years in Washington, to learn from him. I didn't work for him, but I just observed what he was doing. And when I came to Ann Arbor, I was infused with this notion of everybody in, nobody out. Kind of found ourselves housed in an ivory tower, quite literally. It's Burton Memorial Tower. It's the home of the Charles Baird Carillon. But I felt it was our time to get out of that tower and into the communities of Southeast Michigan. So everybody in, nobody out for 30 years was our North Star at UMS. And I'm happy to say that my successor, Matthew Van Biesen, is infused with this same sense of the arts are for everybody. And he's doing a fabulous job expanding even beyond, way beyond what I was able to do. But that's where everybody in, nobody out comes with, and with the permission of the Hayes family and with Washington Performing Arts now, that's the title of the book.
That's terrific. Well, having worked with you on this book, Ken, I know it was quite a journey. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that. How did you come up with the idea for the book in the first place? How did you go about shaping what was going to be included in it?
Well, I was very lucky. You know, when you're part of the University of Michigan, it means there's opportunity to speak to alumni groups around the country. I was fortunate to speak many years at Camp Michigania, the university's family alumni camp, and then to be invited with my wife, Penny, to lead some tours sponsored by the Alumni Association. And each of these, I had the opportunity to talk about UMS, and a number of people after the presentation would say, "You got to write a book, pal." And so I wasn't sure that that's what I would do, but you know, when you retire, you have a little more time, and so I had two things happen. One, after an event, Marvin Parnes, a wonderful University of Michigan employee, after he was retiring from one of the jobs he had, then I was walking out with a gentleman who happens to be the attorney for the University of Michigan Press, Jack Bernard. And he said, "So Ken, what are you going to do?" And I'm thinking about a book. Well, he called you guys and said, "You might want to talk to this friend." But at the same time, Tom McMullen, a wonderful a sponsor of UMS concerts and a successful businessman in town, I had an opportunity to have a meeting with him and his wife, as I was interested in making sure that there would be support for UMS beyond my my retirement, because it had just been announced that I would be retiring. And I met with Tom and Debbie and invited them to continue their support. And they came back a few days later and said, "Ken, what we'd like to do is help you get that book started and done." And okay. And then a few days later, there was a gift to UMS that would assure that there would be funding from the McMullen family for the next 5 years for concerts. And then he said, and for the rest of this, use some of that to get that book started and done. And by the way, Ken, if you happen to throw that story in with me playing golf with Baryshnikov, that would be great. And so on the slide here, you see the day I got the books that they arrived. And then my first trip, and this was COVID, summer of COVID 2020, I hopped in my car for my first trip outside of Ann Arbor, drove up to Tom and Debbie's cottage at Elk Lake and delivered a box of books, which he had me sign. And then the rest of the time, with Tom's having given a sufficient grant to UMS, it enabled UMS to purchase 1,000 copies of the book. And about half of those were books to be given away. And the other half, well, since they'd already been purchased, we could sell them and have 100% of it go to UMS. So I had a lot of fun over the last couple of years, autographing these books and then hand delivering them. And you can do that during COVID if you wear a mask and you knock on the door and you say, or you go down the back porch. But this was a way for me, after I retired, to reconnect with these wonderful people that had supported UMS for so many years.
And the book has such a great mixture of sort of backstage stories, but also kind of tips on engaging different members of the community, principles for leadership. Did you know going into the writing process that you wanted to bring all of that together into the book?
Well, I thought, you know, a good friend of mine, Ken Foster, has written a book on the sort of how to do it, how to be an outstanding concert manager, arts presenter. I didn't want to write, you know, sort of textbook, but I thought if I could tell some stories and talk about how we made the decisions that we did in certain circumstances, and how we got engaged with the community and why we did this. What was it about UMS that artists found attractive? Share some of that. I'm now teaching at the university, teaching an arts leadership course, and we're actually using the book now, not as a textbook, but a way to maybe stimulate questions on how we were able to do things, what was behind the decisions, and so on. But certainly one of the things we had to do early on was get out of the tower and into the communities of Southeast Michigan. And that meant communities of shared heritage. When you're in the business of cultural expression, but you don't have a relationship with certain of the communities, you need to build those relationships. They need to be built on genuine partnerships and relationships. And we used 4 principles, cooperation, communication, vulnerability, and reciprocity. And these were so important as we build partnerships. And the last 2 are the most important: vulnerability and reciprocity. That means that you go into a new relationship with an open mind, asking a lot of questions, seeking to learn as much as possible to build a genuine relationship. And then vulnerability, reciprocity means you're going to build a relationship. You want to be sure that your partner is gaining as much or more from the process. So that helped us in all of our relationships, whether they were with artists, educational institutions, other arts organizations. And so that was really important. And I know one of the first things I did was, I built a relationship with Wynton Marsalis. I was able to present Wynton on 19 occasions, and I was honored when he accepted my invitation to write the foreword to my book. But Wynton is a kind of a guy, think about him. Wynton is a great composer, great trumpet player. He leads a magnificent group. He's a wonderful and articulate spokesperson. He can talk about sports. He can talk about history. First and foremost, in my view, is Wynton the educator. Almost every time he came to Ann Arbor, he would meet with students. And in writing the foreword to the book, while he talks about UMS and uses us as a kind of example, his foreword is really a gift to any performing arts presenter in the world, because he documents what the presenter does at every step of the way. And when you're reading that, whether you're a presenter in Australia or Zimbabwe or up in Calgary or out in San Francisco, you read that with a smile, because you understand Wynton gets it. Wynton gets it. And it's about meeting with the kids, but it's also meeting with the sponsors, and it's going out afterwards with the high school and college band kids. So building a relationship with Wynton was very special, but building it with a number of other artists, we'll get to talk about Bernstein and Patrick Stewart and some of the others a little bit later. But certainly building relationships with artists was really critical. I think in the next slide, you'll get a sense of community engagement. We needed some sponsorship, I think, from the community. And the oldest thing we did was the Handel's Messiah. We've done that since 1879. And my brother, Jerry, my late brother, Jerry, at the time was a banker with US Bank. And I'd not ever asked money from a banker. So I called my brother and said, so Jerry, what do I do when I go talk to the banker? And he said, well, little brother, you got to be quiet. You're not going to go sell. You want to ask questions. This man is very proud of his bank. And so ask him about his bank. And so with Mr. Weber, I said, Mr. Weber, tell me about your bank. And what he was doing was telling me, in the questions that I asked and the probing that I did, giving me the clues. When he would ask me, Ken, what can I do for you? I would have a way to answer. What he was telling me was his bank was the only locally owned and locally headquartered bank in Ann Arbor. It was the oldest. It had been around for a long time. And they sponsored organizations and told me that one of them was the Ann Arbor Symphony, another was the University of Michigan. So when it came time for him to say, well, Ken, what can I do for you? I was able to say, well, Mr. Weber, based on what you've told me, you're an old bank. So are we. The oldest thing we do actually is Handel's Messiah. Mr. Weber, this year, the Ann Arbor Symphony is accompanying the Messiah, and all the singers are from the University of Michigan, two of the organizations that you support. Mr. Weber, what would you think about providing us $10,000 to sponsor Handel's Messiah? You'll be the first ever corporate sponsor of Handel's Messiah. But let me tell you, before we go on, Mr. Weber, that $10,000 you'd give to us only stays with us for a short time, because we're then going to use that to pay the Ann Arbor Symphony. And then, Mr. Weber, they're going to use that to pay each of the individual members of the orchestra. And then you know what they're going to do with it, Mr. Weber? Deposit it back in your bank. And Mr. Weber, think of all the good that $10,000 will do as it makes its way around the community. What I'm telling you, Scott, is had I not called my brother, I would have gone in there to try to sell. Not a good approach. So our approach with working with every local business from then on was, how can we be in a partnership? What can we do to help you with your goals? Are they greater visibility, client cultivation, employee reward, customer appreciation? And taking that approach of asking questions, how can we help you, really change the whole dynamic. And that's the way UMS has been working with local businesses. But it was also the way, we sought to work with others. So you see here on the slide, these are the soloists for that Messiah in 1988 that Mr. Weber and Great Lakes Bancorp helped sponsor. Then next to him is Mikhail Baryshnikov. You might recognize him that's Dennis Saris. And when we had Mikhail Baryshnikov come to town, he was, this was in 2004. He wasn't dancing much anymore, but he was in a play by Gabriadze from Georgia near Russia. And we sat down with him the first day and said, well, Mr. Baryshnikov, we have some things in mind for you to do. And we were thinking about this, and this. We had our staff sitting around, and he nodded and said, Ken, I'd rather play golf. But what does that mean? Do we get discouraged? He eventually did most of those things we wanted, but golf was on his mind. So we had him play with staff one day. Then the next day, Dennis Saris, Tom McMullen, and I played with Baryshnikov. This began a 15-year relationship between Mikhail Baryshnikov and Dennis Saris. And every time Baryshnikov would come back to town, or when Dennis would go to New York, or the family, they would get together. That builds a special relationship between the artist and the community. And then, what did Dennis and Ellie do for us? The Main Street Ventures restaurants were theirs. They provided us opportunities to have coupons where we could take artists, we could take the staff. And that kind of relationship with local retailers and with restaurants enabled us, to save money, but also give visibility to these businesses. So deepening our relationship with the community. In fact, there was a book by Tom Peters and Waterman back in the 80s. I can't remember the title, it had something to do with success. And but the major principle there was management by walking around. Management by walking around. That's exactly what we needed to do at UMS, walking around in communities of shared heritage with the other arts organizations in town, with educational organizations, foundations. So management by walking around was really a principle to get out of the tower and into the communities of Southeast Michigan. And then I think coming up, there's never any end to with whom you can build relationships. So Cecilia Bartoli, great soprano, she was just becoming known. And in 1993, we presented her. But about a year before this, I was getting a haircut from Bob Dascola. And that was when Dascola's had 8 chairs on Liberty Street, his Italian barbers. And on the principle that if you want to keep a secret, don't tell your hairdresser. I got my hair cut from Bobby, and I said, Bob, I'm going to tell you something, but you can't tell a soul. And it came down, I whispered in his ear, Cecilia Bartoli is coming in a year and a half, but you can't tell anybody. Well, he stood in front of the chair, he crossed himself, says, Ken, you can count on me. I won't tell anybody. And of course, what did he do? He told everybody, which is exactly what I wanted. And before you knew it, there was a VHS machine up there. Remember those? And they were pumping all kinds of tapes in there of Cecilia singing La Cenerentola, which means Cinderella, and other kinds of things. They sold tickets out of the shop. And this photo here is just wonderful. In 1995, Cecilia came. She sang on a Friday night, but we had arranged for a tailgate where she'd be the guest. And I called Bob and I said, Bobby, I'm bringing Cecilia by on our way to the tailgate down at the natatorium. You get a crowd there, okay? So we stopped in front of the barbershop. But before we stopped there, I had called the Ann Arbor News and said, you know, if you think the big story in this town is the decision of the president to resign at the end of his term, the big story is Cecilia Bartoli is going to be at that school of barbershop. So they came up, the Ann Arbor News came up, and on the Sunday paper, this was all happening on a Saturday, above the fold, color photo, Cecilia Bartoli with the Dascola Barbers. And then over the year, Bobby has a shrine now at his South State office. And the slide here was the last time Cecilia came in 2004. Bob welcomed her and the entire Italian community that he could fit upstairs. But again, this is what deepens a connection between an artist and the community when they feel the enormous support, which the people in Ann Arbor do in spades. In fact, Scott, something happened, you know, in 1999, the Berlin Philharmonic came. It was a sensational concert. And Peter Riegelbauer, who is the string bass player, who is the elected president of the orchestra, he wrote me an email after they were here. And he said, you know, Ken, there's no place quite like Ann Arbor, certainly not on this tour. He mentioned 5 things. He said, number one, you're the smallest town, but you delivered the largest crowd on their international tour in this great hall with its wonderful acoustics. Number 2, you let us play what we want to play. In these other cities on the tour, they didn't like the fact we were playing Schoenberg's Pelléas and Malazan. Can't you give us something else? Well, we checked our records. It had never been performed before, either by the university or UMS on that stage. Terrific piece to do. Third, he said, we looked out in the audience and we saw students everywhere. We didn't see this in the other cities, and we love to see students. And of course, we always set aside tickets for students. He said, fourth, the hospitality you guys offer here in Ann Arbor, there's nothing like it. And it begins with that letter in German on the bed of every single orchestra member at that time at the Campus Inn, welcoming people on, you know, I wrote the letter, but it's welcoming them on behalf of the people of Ann Arbor. And, you know, if you have a Zingerman's coupon and, you know, a pass to the rec, you know, CCRB, the recreation building, they like that a lot. And the final thing he said is, you knew how to take care of our conductor. And maybe if there's still time later, we'll talk about what that means. You knew how to take care of our conductor, because it's one of the classic stories. So this relationship with Bob continues. Let me talk about this one, because not only do you want to build relationships with communities of shared heritage and local businesses, you definitely want a relationship with the other arts organizations. And UMS had a sense of our quality being so high that we might want to prefer to go it alone than working together with lots of others. And of course, that's exactly the opposite of what Patrick Hayes saw. It's about everybody in, nobody out. Work with others, be generous. You know, rising tide lifts all boats. The more we can work together, the greater the opportunity for helping everybody. And so Russ Collins at the Michigan Theater, who, by the way, over 40 years with the Michigan Theater and one of my great colleagues, he and I convened a meeting that had the Carytown Concert House. It had the University School of Music, a partnership. We were pulling together all kinds of people because Andre Previn at that time, this is back in 1988, 89, 90, after Bernstein had died in 1990, there wasn't any other musician that we see that was as versatile as this guy. So why don't we, with Russ Collins, do a film festival that features the 4 Academy Award winning films that Andre Previn scored. Let's work with the School of Music on composition, have him conduct the Ann Arbor Symphony, have him work with the Southeast Michigan Jazz Association, and then play chamber music down at the Carytown Concert House. Anyway, we were broadening this group. And so Ed Suravel, who, like Andre Previn, loves antiquarian books and antiques. So these guys hit it off on a personal basis. Then Russ Collins and I were representing the arts community and invited Andre Previn then to be connected with us over a 3-week period. That particular residency was unable to work out, but 2 years later, in 1994, the Previn residency was going to happen in 91, 92, but several years later, the Martha Graham Dance Company, on the occasion of her 100th anniversary, came to Ann Arbor. I'm going to just be quiet for a minute. I've been talking for a long time. So Scott, maybe you have another question. Sorry.
No problem, Ken. That was all awesome. I think we should turn to that sort of, you've talked a lot about relationship with small businesses and other arts organizations, but maybe we could talk a little bit about the relationship with the University of Michigan, sort of the parent institution for UMS. And I know you put a lot of work into fostering that as well, right?
Well, there were several things. First of all, when I was looking at our relationship to the university upon my arrival, I saw that we really didn't have that much of an engagement. And we had our offices in Burton Memorial Tower, but we were getting no funding from the university except utility costs and free rent. Why? Because we had helped raise money for the construction of Burton Tower back in the mid-30s, and as a kind of a gift to UMS, not only for helping to raise that money, but we had actually founded the School of Music back in 1880, 1 year after we got started. And we oversaw the first 60 years of the School of Music. And in 1940, that was then turned over to the university. So what we got in return for these two things was the first floor and the basement of Burton Memorial Tower. But we loved being there, the Charles Baird Carillon atop the place. But several things, by the way, I was a student in the study of higher education at the new Marcel Family School of Education. Thank you, Elizabeth Moji, our dean. It's a wonderful, wonderful school. It's a $50 million gift we just received, and I'm very proud to be an alum. So I was infused with the study of higher education. So when I arrived, I saw that when you think about the mission of a university, teaching, research, and public engagement, we were clearly in the public engagement realm. We were a good window into the community. The university loved what we were doing, town and gown relationships. But we needed to strengthen our how we would support teaching and research. And so we undertook over the next few years, deepening our connection with the academic enterprise. And I mean, one of the things that I did, very simple, every October, the University Record publishes the faculty awardees. Who gets awards? Well, we began to write to every single one of them, telling them how proud UMS is of them, inviting them to be our guests at a concert where they most often would sit with me. And so every year I was getting to know top faculty at the University of Michigan because I was interested. And I got to tell you, not many other departments wrote to faculty members in history or mathematics, so they were happy to get this recognition. But over the years, that was enabling me to build a wonderful relationship across the university. Then there's the Fleming Walk. Remember, I was talking about management by walking around. Well, I'm a member of Ann Arbor Rotary, and we would meet at the Michigan Union, and twice a month, I'd start at the 6th floor of the Fleming building, starting to get to know assistants and secretaries, never expecting to see anybody, just getting to know people along the way. Well, eventually, it might be that the secretary to the general counsel would say, well, Ken, do you want to speak to Tim Lynch about anything? Well, before I knew it, I was talking to the general counsel. Or how about Cynthia Wilbanks, who runs university relations or finance? Well, over the course of the years, I was able to really get to know every one of our executive officers. And that was because of the Fleming Walk. And very often, Erica Horebek, who works with the president of the university, I'd say hi to Erica. Ken, do you want to see Mary Sue? You want to see Lee? Well, why not? and an appointment that might take me, 3 months. And the key was, don't expect it. The other thing is, I would invite a lot. Penny and I had 4 seats to the University of Michigan games. And that enabled us then to invite a couple. Well, that new banker in town, or that new dean, or other new people in town. 5 hours with Penny and me on a football Saturday means President's tailgate, sit in the game, go to the Regents guest area. And by the time the day is over, that person has met the president, the provost, most of the regents, most of the executive officers, and a lot of the deans, okay? Well, that new banker in town, or that new, university officer or dean or faculty member, is grateful for that opportunity. These were just things natural for me because I knew about higher education. In fact, in 2002, my counterpart at the University of Illinois, Arizona State, and a colleague from LA, we formed the Major University Presenters Network of 20 institutions who had in common our commitment to deepen our relationship with the academic enterprise in our area. And that meant, remember I talked about the 2 legs that needed work for us were teaching and research. And so all of us then were committed to deepening this connection to a variety of academic disciplines. And the research, what that meant to us is commissioning of new work. And I remember sitting with Lee Bollinger and Nancy Cantor, and when they said, well, Ken, what are you doing in research? And I said, well, we've commissioned 21 new works in dance, theater, and music over the last 11 years. Or no, it was, I think at that time, 14 years. And Lee and Nancy, every time those works are performed in Suntory Hall in Japan, at the Barbican of London, in the Châtelet of Paris, they bear the name of the University of Michigan. And you haven't paid a dime for any of it, nor have you supported our education. And I had presented 8 pages of what we were doing with students and internships and pre and post performance chats and artists in the classroom and so on. And then Lee and I said, we cannot continue to provide this kind of support to your teaching and research mission without support. And Lee Bollinger said, Ken, how much do you need? I said, Lee, I need $750,000 a year. He gulped and said, I've only got 5. I said, make it 6 and we got a deal. So in 2001 was when I made the pitch to Lee, and beginning in 2002, UMS has had support each year in a general grant from the university. Prior to that time, we had been what they call a tub on our own bottom. There was occasional support if there was a search, and of course we were always benefited from that office space and utilities. And it's a wonderful partnership now with the university, but we've been able to give so much back in this mutual relationship. And so I don't think we've ever had a relationship better we have now. And of course, I've been out for 6 years. I keep my eye on it. And I know Santa Ono is a cellist and Matthew Van Biesen, and he have built a wonderful relationship. We have a wonderful dean in Lori Macaulay. I've never seen a group of deans in my 36 years who are more collaborative, who respect and admire and support each other. And this it means so much to the university and to students and faculty. And it's part of our success as an institution, is that we have leadership at the top. Executive officers are superb. We've got a great group of regents, and now the deans. And what I admire so much is how they support and collaborate with one another. Let me just say one other thing, because this is an example of how UMS is working with institutions that might not seem, a natural connection. But when 2001: A Space Odyssey had its 50th anniversary, my successor, Matthew, and the staff said, why don't we project the movie, that popular movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey, which has fabulous music. Let's get a live orchestra to play that. And what's that about? It's about space. Well, why not have let's go talk to the dean of the College of Engineering, who happens to be involved in aerospace and space science and so on. And the College of Engineering became a principal sponsor of 2001: A Space Odyssey. And what were they able to do? Have 5 different sessions around campus on aerospace engineering. And these were flocked with students and high school kids and adults wanting to learn about this. So it was a marriage, scholarship, performance, the university, UMS. And we're just seeing that in spades now. In fact, there's a course called Engaging Performance that's sponsored by LSNA, or it's overseen by LSNA and the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And the material are performances. I think it's 14 performances that the students come to. And they come from all over the campus. They go to performances, they write about them, they speak about them. That didn't exist, but maybe 7, 8 years ago, and we're really proud of that. But that's an example of how you integrate what we put on the stage with what's happening in the classroom.
Can I'd like to go back a step. You were talking about university presidents, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about my favorite story from the book that involves a university president, and that's the Leonard Bernstein story.
Oh, this is a great one. So I had just arrived. And what do I have to do? I got to invite Leonard Bernstein. I mean, the first concerts I did were at Hill Auditorium, back-to-back performances. Leonard Bernstein, the Vienna Philharmonic. It doesn't get any better than that. But is that intimidating to a kid that's just starting out in this business? Well, my job was to do what you see down here at the bottom. In 1987, in September, these were my first 2 concerts. At the end of that second concert, I had to invite Leonard Bernstein to come to Ann Arbor the next year. He and I knew that he would be coming out on a short North American tour, and many presenters were seeking to have the orchestra come. Bernstein at this time was 70 years old. He was not in good health. Who knew how much longer he'd be with us? So my job was to invite him to come. And I'm tall, he's short, he's even shorter sitting in a chair like he is here. I got down on my knee and looked him in the eye and said, Mr. Bernstein, we want to have you back next year, something feeble like that. And his response was, and these are his exact words, Ken, I love this town, I love the people of this town, and I love this hall. We'll be back. And a few weeks later, he chose 4 North American cities, New York, Washington, Toronto, and Ann Arbor. And the tour would begin in Ann Arbor. And these other 2 photos you see here. So Jim Duderstadt had just become president of the university on October 1st, 1988. I went to see him and his wife, Ann, to suggest that the first social event at their home could be Leonard Bernstein. And Jim and Ann, I can tell you, every major donor of the university would want to be there. So consider that opportunity. They thought about it, came back to me with this beautiful response. Ken, we've thought about what you said, but what if the guests were 30 students who are doing now what Bernstein might have been doing at his age, studying piano and conducting and composing. I said, Jim and Ann, that's brilliant. And so Paul Boylan, at the time, the dean of the School of Music, and I determined that he would invite 20 kids who were doing those sorts of things. And I said, I want the first 10 kids in line. Because what happened, we wanted to be sure that there were lots of kids. These tickets were going for $125 a piece. I mean, that's what you have to do to have the Vienna Philharmonic come. They were not all 125, but a lot of them were. But we wanted to put 550 tickets for students at $10 a piece. Well, this was pre-internet, pre-email, they lined up 14 hours in advance. And so I said, the first 10 kids in line, they deserve the opportunity to be part of that group of 30. And sure enough, what happened? President of the university invited each of these 30 kids, on that beautiful invitation that a president sends. Now, Bernstein is notorious for, wanting to do other things after a concert. But he said, Ken, I'm committed. I'll be at the president's home. But understand that anybody who's in line backstage, I see them. I do not cut that short. So we might not be at the president's home for a while, but we'll be there. And sure enough, around midnight, Leonard Bernstein arrived, and he held court with these kids for an hour and a half. Well, a little bit longer, but at 1:30, I went to him and I said, Mr. Bernstein, folks are starting to fade around here. Maybe we need to leave and go to the next spot. And he said, Ken, I don't think so. And he went to the piano and started playing tunes from Candide and West Side Story. Now, I'll picture this. Here is probably the most famous conductor, certainly the best known to people here at the university, Leonard Bernstein, holding court with these kids, these 30 kids, for an hour and a half. And then when I say, I think we need to wrap it up, I don't think so. And he goes to the piano and plays these famous tunes from West Side Story. But then 10 minutes later, he said, okay, Ken, I think we do need to go. Now, where's that place you've set up? And I'd gotten in touch with the Full Moon down on Main Street. And the owner there said, I'll keep it open for Leonard Bernstein and whoever's coming for as long as I can. Just make sure the students bring ID. Thank God, because most of them were freshmen, first-year students. They were the ones that lined up. Sure enough, Leonard Bernstein at that point said, okay, we're going down to the Full Moon. Who has cars? Well, some upperclassmen were there. He said, you drive down. Who doesn't have cars? All these freshmen raised their hand. Pile in the limo with me. He drove those kids down to the Full Moon and held court till 4:30 in the morning. And the kids that you see in this photo, I still hear from some of them saying, that changed my life. In fact, the first person in line, Jennifer Dowderman, a first-year student, went on to Berlin to found Classical Next and told me that night really inspired me to make a career in classical music, especially bringing it to young people. So yeah, I always tip my hat to Jim and Ann Duderstadt for that really enlightened, brilliant decision. Let's have Lenny's. What turned out to be, that was his last time in Ann Arbor, and it was with our students, and very, very special.
But not all of the presentations that you worked on went off completely without a hitch, right? And there were some that you needed to dodge and weave a little bit, right?
Well, when I think of historic performances, certainly the Bernstein event is a memorable one, but this was another one, and it was a cancellation, but it was the finest hour of UMS. And so here's what happened. Cecilia Bartoli was to come here in 1997. It was going to be an Easter Eve concert, and it would be the highest grossing regular season concert in the history of UMS. the highest grossing concert in the history of UMS. But on Wednesday night, before the Saturday performance, I got a call from Jack Mastroianni, the person of the manager of Cecilia, and he called kind of desperate. He said, Ken, Cecilia has been exposed to a draft here in Akron. She has a performance tonight, but I'm afraid she's not going to be able to sing tomorrow, Friday, or Saturday. I'm just really concerned. Well, I hopped in the car, drove down to Akron, discovered which of the 3 hotels she might be in, and I sat in the lobby, and her boyfriend, Claudio, came through the lobby late. He said, Ken, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I've heard that Cecilia had some challenges today, and I just want to be here to support her. And I said, look, what he said was, Ken, she did not go to the donor dinner here in Akron. She wanted to come back immediately to rest up and see if she could save her voice. I said, look, I'm going to be here till whenever she awakens. So after 12 noon, I got a call from her. She was a baritone. I mean, this beautiful voice of hers. And we had lunch. I didn't want her to speak a lot. And she said, Ken, I just know I'm not going to be able to perform on Saturday in Ann Arbor. I said, Cecilia, we're here to support you if that's your decision. We understand. But if you could just let me know what I might be able to say to the people of Ann Arbor. And she wrote, I wrote her dictation, which was in a whisper from her. Then I hopped in the car and headed back to Ann Arbor. You remember they had cell phones at that time, like this. And I was speaking to Michael Kanjoka, our wonderful artistic administrator, head of programming, and to say, I just called Doug Wheeler of Washington Performing Arts. I got a great idea. We could get Denise Graves to substitute. She's Cecilia-esque, she's young, she just sang Carmen at the Met, and she's available. What do you think? And he said, Ken, that's a good idea, but I want you to consider Ewa Podles. And I said, well, Michael, I haven't heard of Ewa Podles. Tell me about her. Well, Ken, she's not Cecilia-esque. She's a little older. She's from Central Europe. And I said, well, Michael, what's the review? What can you heard her recently? He said, yeah, but we can't use the review. It's a great review, but we can't use it because it's embargoed. And I said, so you're wanting to recommend an artist that I haven't heard of, and most of the audience wouldn't have heard of, to substitute for the woman that would do the highest grossing concert. I need to know more. Why? And he said, because she deserves it. She's got a 4-octave range. She's been stuck in Central Europe. She had her debut years ago. Ken, she needs it. Well, when you work with Michael Kanjoka, as I did for 30 years, you come to trust his judgment. And you can trust the Ann Arbor audience if you say, UMS says we need to hear this person. 3,600 of the 4,200 people showed up that night to hear Ewa Podles. And she was spectacular. Our audience, well, you know, I came on out, thanked them all, because we had called all of the people. That's the other thing. On Friday morning, Sarah Billman, our vice president for marketing and communications, we had divided up, remember the computer lists. This was not online. This was paper stuff. And we distributed them to 20 members of the staff. We got on the phone, called every single ticket purchaser to tell them that Cecilia concert, she's canceled, but you got to hear Ewa Podles is going to be performing. And the people of Ann Arbor, not just for what we had done, but for the entire history of the organization, they'd come to trust the artistic judgment of UMS. 3,600 of them showed up. And when I came out on the stage and I read this little notice from Cecilia, my dear friends of Ann Arbor, I'm so sorry, but a draft in the hall in Ohio was relentless. When I said Ohio, I reached the balconies, people had a chuckle, but they stood up when she came on stage, which of course was what you would hope an audience would do, because at the time, Cecilia was the best-selling female opera singer in the world. And here was a relative unknown stepping into her place. So the Ann Arbor community gave her a warm welcome. And when it was over, they gave a standing ovation. But it's a one last piece of the story that always touches me. Ronnie Cresswell, the late head of Warner Lambert, was the sponsor of the concert. And just a wonderful man who was generous. And for every concert he sponsored, he not only made the gift to UMS to support it, but he purchased 100 tickets at full price to invite community members in. Then he would write a personal check. Those three things he would always do. Well, you know, he had asked for Cecilia Bartoli, but she had canceled. So Catherine Arcure, who was our development director at that, finally we were able to reach him late Thursday night to say, you know, Ronnie, you asked for Cecilia Bartoli. She cannot sing. You have every right to. And he interrupted. Are you kidding? You think I'm not going to support? Who is it? Ewa Podles. And what happened? He wrote to all 100 people and said, "We've got an opportunity here. Wonderful singer." And then at the reception afterwards, which I'll never forget, you know, I say thank you to the sponsor and to the artist. And then Ronnie, who's Scottish, grabbed the mic and said, "Ken, I need to say a few words." And he looked out at the audience and he said, "You know, when I was a kid growing up in Scotland, my parents gave me a recording of a wonderful contralto named Kathleen Ferrier. I listened to that recording all the time. And I said to myself when I was a kid, I'll never hear another voice like it." Then he turned to Ava and said, till tonight. Can you imagine how that made her feel? Till tonight. And then Marguerite Oliver, who owned Postabilities here and has Italian blood, she was going to do the Easter brunch, sold out for Cecilia. And all the people that had signed up for that lunch with Cecilia came to the lunch for Ava. And all Marguerite said is, "I hope this Polish woman loves Italian food, because that's what she's going to get." And the other part of this story is Cecilia felt so badly about having to cancel. She got in touch with us and said, "May I please open your next season? May I please open your next season?" And sure enough, she then opened our season. And what a lot of people don't know is we actually netted more money on the Cecilia cancellation, because the difference in her fee and that of Ewa Podles was more than we would have to have refunded. So for us, and what I say, this was our staff at the finest hour, because we, you know, in most cities of the world, if Cecilia cancels, you cancel. But our reputation at Michigan, let's find that opportunity for that wonderful singer that just needs a break. And then the audience responds, the Ann Arbor audience. Why did the Berlin Phil like coming here? You know, the audience is open to accepting things that are unfamiliar. In fact, Scott, one of the shifts we see in the musical society over the last 30 years has been there were people that would say, "Well, I'm not going. I've never heard of the artist." What they're saying is now, "Well, I've never heard of that artist. I've got to go. I got to go." That's a major shift. And Michael Konjoka, Matthew Van Biesen, they're carrying on this notion of let's help people discover new art forms, new artists. So.
And we have a terrific question from the audience. Stephen Schreiber asks, what role did you and your brother's French horn playing have in your programming at UMS over the years?
Stephen Schreiber, my old friend from the College of Worcester. Well, Stephen, first of all, you should know that my successor at UMS, Matthew Van Biesen, we had four things in common. Number one, we both grew up in the Midwest. We both went to Midwest schools. We both went to Interlochen as French horn players. And so, I mean, who's not going to love being succeeded by another horn player? The opportunity to continue to grow in my music at the College of Worcester, I played in the orchestra there. then, in graduate school, played horn in the Goliard Brass Ensemble. Why were we called the Goliard Brass Ensemble? Because the Goliards were a band of roving students in 12th and 13th century Europe known for rioting and intemperance. A perfect description of the University of Michigan student of the late 60s. But I kind of dropped the horn in favor of singing in a madrigal group, Steve. And so that we could have Hermann Baumann do some concertos early on in my career. And of course, I got to know the horn sections of the New York Phil, the Berlin Philharmonic. I mean, we became buds, but it didn't influence the programming that much. Michael Konjoka was a clarinet player, Sarah Billman, an oboist, I playing French horn. We thought about, could we get a bassoonist and a flutist and find a woodwind quintet within UMS, but that didn't quite happen. But thank you for the question. Thank you for participating. This is great.
Well, Ken, we're unfortunately just about out of time, so I wanted to turn to the question we've been asking all of our Book of the Month authors, and that's, what have you been reading lately?
Well, some people say I look like Steve Martin, and so he's just done a kind of graphic bio, and I can't remember the title of it. Oh, it has something to do with when you're an actor. The director says number one is coming, something like that. So I've been reading that, but I also got a copy of it's not real sexy, but the January 6th committee report. I'm starting in on that. I'm sorry it's not more adventuresome. Reading a lot of newspapers these days, and trying to keep up with stuff. And I'm trying to think what else I'm working on right now. But January 6th, I think we all need to take a look at that.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Any kind of final words for the audience?
Well, I mean, there's just that one last story about the Berlin Phil, and it's where it was that concert in 1999 where Peter Riegelbauer said what he did about the community, and that you just pull up Patrick Stewart. We had the Royal Shakespeare Company come, and I got in touch with Patrick Stewart and said, Mr. Stewart, I want to offer you a leading role center stage in the largest theater in the round in the United States of America. Are you interested? And he said, yeah, sure. What do you got in mind? He said, conduct the Michigan Marching Band. And he did. We had a halftime show of all the famous, TV themes, Hawaii Five-0, Gilligan's Island. Then he ended, the announcer said, and now, ladies and gentlemen, for our final piece, Mounting the Ladder, Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Starship Enterprise. And then he conducted the Star Trek theme, and then turned around and said, the guy at the announcer, Carl Grapentine, said, Captain, in 2 weeks we go to Columbus. What are your orders? And he said, boldly go forth and beat the Buckeyes, make it so #1, because at the time we were #2, they were #1 in the country. Turns out we lost 42-39. Bo Schembechler had died the day before. It was one of those great games, but we came out on the short end. But Patrick Stewart, having him here playing Prospero and Antony, it was wonderful. So thanks, Scott, for giving me an opportunity to talk about the book.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ken, for being with us this evening. The book, again, is Everybody In, Nobody Out, and it's on sale for $20 with free shipping through the University of Michigan Press website. You just have to use the discount code UMGL20ART to get that deal. Thank you, everyone, for being with us this evening, and thank you again, Ken.
Thank you. Take care.
Good night, everyone.